everyone, this is Jill Hurston from CenterZip. Welcome to our webinar today. I'd like to remind everyone that I am recording this session and you will get an email from me tomorrow with the direct link to the presentation and to the recording. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box and we will get to them as they come in. For now, I'd like to introduce Pankaj Jain. He is our moderator from CenterZip. Pankaj, go ahead.
Thanks, Jill. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Scaling Agile Organically. Jill has already covered the logistics today. As she said, like the webinar is recorded today and you will get a link tomorrow. I encourage all of you to ask questions throughout the chat box, throughout the presentation. We will try to get to all of them. Let me introduce our speaker for today. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Damon Poole. He's a seasoned Agile coach that has kick-started, coached, and tuned up dozens of Agile teams in a wide variety of companies, all industries and sizes. My connection to Damon goes a long way back. Damon was a lead at Open Software Foundation, and I was lead developer porting DEC RDB database from VMS to OSF1. Jury is still out if Damon found any bug in my code. Right, Damon?
Maybe.
With that said, over to you, Damon, for your presentation.
OSF1, boy, that really is going back. Those were the days. Well, speaking of large-scale software development, which that project definitely was, we're going to be talking about scaling Agile organically today. And before we get too far, let's just talk about what does scaling Agile really mean. So that's always kind of been a sticking point for me in the scaling. Very often, people will say, well, we have a number of Scrum teams now. We want to really scale this up. What does that mean? And often when people start a project, they'll say, well, this is a really large project. Let's throw 10 teams at it and coordinate them. And so we need something to put that all together. And there's nothing wrong. I want to state that at the beginning. There is nothing wrong with having a scaling framework like Scaled Agile or LESS or Enterprise Scrum or any number of the emerging scaling frameworks that are out there. My main point in this presentation is, rather than thinking I need to implement that wholesale and throw 10 teams at something right away, let's talk about scaling it organically, starting from a seed and growing to something larger. So in order to talk about that, I think we need to talk a little bit about what do we mean by Agile. And also, by the way, so we covered my background already, but I just want to point out that and we'll talk a little bit about it at the end. If you're curious what Nexxle is, you can go and check that out. But it's basically a to-do list, a free to-do list that you can use with anybody for anything. All right, so we need to start with what is Agile, and that all goes back to the Agile manifesto. And very often people think that Agile came from the Agile manifesto, but in fact, the Agile manifesto was a distillation of something that already existed, right? So you had folks like Ken Schwaber, Ken Schwaber, Jeff Sutherland, who had Scrum, and there was XP out there, and all these other things that already embodied Agile. It just had not been distilled into principles and values. So here are people that had common values and principles, and they got together and they said, what is it that we have in common here? There's some mysterious thing. And so as a result of that meeting at Snowbird in Utah in 2001, they came up with what they call the Agile Manifesto. And you can see the Agile principles in something like Scrum. Now I've made these connections here. You might have different connections or more connections or fewer, whatever. The point here is not that this is exactly how it lays out, but that you can see the principles and values in, for instance, Scrum. You could do it with XP as well, but I've just used Scrum as an example. So if we take a look at product owner is an example of how to embody the idea that business people and developers must work together daily, that customer collaboration is important, that you want to be able to respond to change, to do continuous delivery of valuable software, and many other things. Right? So you can look at these. I'll give you a moment to just take a look at this. and think about these connections. All right. Also gave me the chance to catch my breath there. Okay, so as we're growing our Agile footprint, if you will, we want to think about what are we growing from, what are we growing to, and what are we growing in? What's the environment? So sometimes people think, all right, we're going Agile, and they just forget about everything that already existed. So here's what exists when you start. And part of what we're going to talk about is don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Just because you're planting this new seed doesn't mean that you get rid of everything that you're used to. Right? So you have in your organization, you have your customers. You have leadership and management and their behaviors. You have policies and procedures. You've got how you develop software today, how you deploy, QA, user experience, all of these things. And were they created overnight? Were they created for no reason? Of course not. They were created over a period of years for very good reasons. Some lost in time, but generally you're doing things the way that you do today because they are what created the success that you have. So you don't really want to get rid of that. And part of the tension, I think, in going Agile is bringing along the good things as you go and keeping those good things as you go Agile. So don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So you have a traditional ecosystem. You've got all these projects and they're running a traditional way, right? And you've got that institutional support and muscle memory. Now you're going to Agile. And very often people will say something like, well, Scrum doesn't have that. Project manager, program manager, portfolio manager, whatever, whatever it is. Scrum doesn't have that, so we don't need it. So that means you have an Agile ecosystem that's pretty small. You've got the coach, you've got, okay, we use Scrum, you've got some managers that are supportive, and you've got some training. That's a pretty small ecosystem. And, maybe that's a good thing. We'll build the ecosystem as we go. Another way to think about this is that just like plants grow, so does your adoption of Agile, so does your adoption of Agile practices. And when I say adoption, I mean actual adoption, not what you aspire to. So you may aspire to do everything in a scaling framework that has hundreds and hundreds of pages and hundreds of concepts. How quickly do you think an organization can absorb 100 new concepts? Right? Just think about Scrum. Scrum has in it just 13 concepts. What about 100? So 13 are hard enough to absorb. So you've got this little plant, and it's growing. It's absorbing things. It's getting better. So you can have the appearance of having implemented something, but the reality is if that system is working with a lot of support, like a whole bunch of external consultants, and you have the consultants in there for 3 to 6 months, and then they go, what happens when they go? If that plant is not stable on its own, it's not going to work out. So think of growing your system, not wholesale implementing it. You may end up having everything from a large scaling framework, but please don't start there. So think about, you have your traditional ecosystem. You've got two Agile projects, and it turns out that they're in the same value stream, if you will. They're working together towards the same deliverable. So you can embed that ecosystem into your traditional ecosystem. And if you're thinking, we don't know how to coordinate these two projects, yes, you do. You have a program manager. They know how to coordinate projects. They've been doing it for years. And if it's not Agile, it's not the end of the world. You're growing your Agile ecosystem. You're getting used to doing Scrum. You're running into problems trying to coordinate things the traditional way. Now you think, okay, we have this specific problem in front of us on Wednesday afternoon at 3:35. What are we going to do? Rather than let's do everything and hope that solves everything. Okay? So Scrum on its own doesn't actually include multiple team guidance. It leaves it as an exercise for the reader. But we have this long history and rich ecosystem of the Agile community to draw on. And if you were to get 20 coaches together today, I can guarantee you that they would talk about the exact same patterns. Maybe this one would have a different one, maybe that one would have a different one, but they're going to have a lot in common. So what are some of those guidelines? And here are just a few. I'll talk about more soon, but grow your efforts from a single team to the needed capacity. Don't start with 10 teams, right? Why do you end up with 10 teams? Because you're thinking, okay, it's a big project, we're going to need all those. but instead, why not grow? Get one team on it, and as needed, grow from there. Make sure that you're truly releasable every iteration. So if you have 3 teams and they're working independently, they should each have a deliverable every iteration. Doesn't mean that you deliver, it's a deliverable that you can, doesn't mean you have to, but that you do. And if you can do that, then when you get to the point of coordinating multiple teams, it means that they are coordinated in a releasable way every iteration, which means that you can get feedback on the overall system all integrated together, that you can demo it, that you can deliver it, all these things. Limit your projects in progress. So if you've got a whole bunch of teams that are working together and they're working on multiple projects, just the complexity of coordinating multiple projects is one thing, and the complexity of coordinating multiple teams is another thing. Coordinating multiple projects across multiple teams, I don't know about you, but I don't want that job. So limit your projects in progress. If you have 12 projects to do in a year, instead of starting 12 on the first month, do one. Get it all the way to done on the first month, then the next one, then the next one, then the next one. Yes, that does require prioritizing, but hey, that's, pick your pain. Where do you want the pain? Reduce your dependencies. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Focus on removing and reducing complexity rather than accommodating it. And I'll give you an example of accommodating it in a moment. Many of the large scaling frameworks have parts of them are there, and this is not a criticism, it's just an observation. Many of the pieces that are there are to accommodate your current complexity, which can shield you from addressing it and making your life better. So as you work towards that, keep that in mind. Treat your Agile expansion as any other project in your portfolio. What does that mean? So you have a portfolio of projects, you have this development project and that development project, you've got a budget for them, a charter, who is running that project, who's responsible, what's the justification for it, what's the expected outcome. It is a project, it's in your portfolio. So if you have an Agile transformation or expansion or growth project, whatever you want to call it, it is a project. Who's responsible for it? What's its charter? What's its budget? Who is working on it? What are the outcomes? How will we know when we're successful? How are we going to report out status and progress? So you can take advantage of your existing ecosystem and infrastructure as you expand out your Agile projects. So here's an example. I'm going to pick on dependencies as one thing. You may, in some frameworks, you'll see the wall of dependencies, and it's got strings from here to there and all over the place. There's nothing wrong with that. As I said, there really is nothing wrong with that. It's making those dependencies obvious, and that's great. But rather than accommodating them, work to remove or reschedule them, right? So here we have a dependency between iteration 3 of team A and iteration 1 of team B. So, traditionally we would say, all right, that's a dependency, we gotta, deal with that. But the thing is that if you have these dependencies, they're not actually releasable until the dependency is actually taken into account, right? The API is written and it's consumed and it's tested, then you have something releasable. And Scrum, at least, says that every iteration from every team should be releasable. That's the goal of Scrum, right? That's where you get the benefits from. So this creates coordination problems and it may cause a delay, right? So if that dependency is not taken into account by one team or they're late, then the other team is going to be late as well. So generally, the dependencies are not between iterations. They're between stories. So if we look at these 2 iterations, we've got these 2 stories and they're rather large. And yes, we could break them down and make this problem even simpler. But just saying, you know what? Rather than do that story way out in iteration 3 as that team was planning, let's coordinate this and bring it forward. So yes, it's going to change the plans of team A, but it's also going to simplify the interaction because now the interactions are within the same iteration. They're not spread out over time, right? So you don't have team B communicating with, basically the future team A saying, in the future, what will you do or what did you do? You'll say, you're working on this right now. This API call doesn't work. We need this API call, whatever it is. Or if you're not working on software, we need this thing in our process, whatever. Right? So bringing those together solves the problem, reduces the complexity rather than accommodating it. And you can apply this thinking to anything as you grow from one team to many. So here are some more techniques that are related to growth. So you're going from one team to 2 teams to 3 teams, whatever. Before, you didn't have to coordinate across teams. Now you say, wow, we ran into a problem, the other team ran into a problem, wish we'd known about that. So just as at the individual level, when you have a problem, you bring it to the stand-up, to the team, and the team says, oh, I can help you with that or whatever. The team says, something comes up, and the team says, oh, we don't know how to solve that. I think that's related to that other team we're working on. Now, if after your individual stand-ups, you have a stand-up of stand-ups or a scrum of scrums, that can now be resolved in real time that day, right away, or maybe the next day. Okay, so that's one pattern. But the point here is adopt it when you need it. Same thing for multi-team retrospectives. We keep running into these same problems. You ran into the problem in your team. We ran into it independently. You solved it one way. We solved it a different way. Now that's in conflict. Hey, why not have your own retrospectives, then send representatives to do a retro of retros? Or, crazy thought, you could even do an open space with everybody, whether it's in person or over conferencing. Why not? But don't just say we're going to do retro of retros. Do it when you have a problem to solve. If you're not having that problem, don't just do it, right? So if it doesn't come up with 2 teams, that's great. If it comes up with 3 teams, okay, great, let's add it. Don't add unnecessary complexity. It's the whole idea of Agile. Do it when you need it. Co-planning. So it may be that you've got 5 teams working together, and there's a question as to who is going to do this work, who's going to do that work. Before or possibly after, or maybe both, you have your individual sprint planning. Do co-planning before and after, right, to coordinate, to move those dependencies or whatever, right? And in your first few iterations, there may be a lot of that, and it goes down over time. You could do something called big room planning, where you do all of this pre-planning across, say, 5 iterations or sprints, and I use the term sprint and iteration interchangeably here, but better to do it as you go. Maybe a little bit up front across multiple iterations, but better to do it as you go. Have regular multiple team reviews, right? So if at the end of multiple iterations you try to do an integration iteration, which by the way is a sign of an issue, that's a red flag, and it doesn't go well, wouldn't it have been better if prior to saying the iteration is closed, you made sure that all of the work of all of the teams working together was integrated and deployable, right? So the only way to test that is to have a multi-team review and say, okay, we're going to show you that across all of the work of all of these teams, this actually does work. Small stories. So there's an underlying pattern here.
Sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to ask a quick question.
Sure.
Brett is asking, is teams over a period of time in your experience, can you talk a little bit about what's the ideal team size looks like, what you have seen from small startups to the enterprise size customers? What's the ideal team size?
Well, that reminds me of something somebody once said. What's the best throw in football? It's the one that gets caught. So I would say that's the same for team sizes. The best team size is the one that works for you. Now that said, one of the things in the Agile community that we talk about a lot is having a size of 5 plus or minus 2, right? Or 7 plus or minus 2, so 5 to 9. There was a study that was done by CA back in the Rally days where they had an offering called Insights that anonymized the data across all of their customers, and they had some heuristics that showed, okay, quality, lack of defects, team morale, whatever, and they associated that with other things like definition of ready, finishing stories on a regular basis, and team size. And what they found was surprisingly that within the group of high-performing teams, not in general, but within the group of high-performing teams, many of them actually were larger than 9, but that once you got past 15, there was a drop-off in quality, morale, and that sort of thing. So up to 15, probably fine. Past that is definitely a no-go. That said, if you find that with your team size things are working great, then fantastic. But better to start with something 9 or less. Okay, so so there's this underlying pattern of when multiple teams are working together, it's a lot like trying to mesh gears, right? So the best way to mesh gears, and in this case, the best way to mesh teams is to make sure that you have small user stories. So that if there's a dependency, we're focusing on the dependency between two small things. If we're trying to get something done this iteration, that we know we're going to get at least these things done, right? So the smaller your user stories, the less confusion, the more clarity, the more progress, the easier it is to interact. And basically, you're trying to create, highly functioning, well-oiled machine with gears that mesh together where the teams are the gears. An escalation tree. So this is a concept that goes beyond the stand-up of stand-ups. So it's a generalization of that, right? So you have an escalation is, as an individual, I have a problem, I bring it to the team, I bring it to the stand-up of stand-ups or scrum of scrums. Then what? If it's not something that can be solved by me, the team, or the team of teams, and it's an organizational issue, then I need somebody that represents the organization at large to be there. And if I only have the opportunity to bring that to a group that meets every month, and maybe they can't cover my thing that month, how much sense does that make? That makes no sense. You need to have the entire organization working at this cadence, and that includes the rest of the organization from the leadership perspective. So one organization that I worked with, they had 40 teams that were in clusters of between 1 and 5 teams. So they had, like 8 different clusters with different team size. And within each cluster, beyond the stand-up of stand-ups, they had a representative from leadership that would show up every day at their scrum of scrums and say, hey, is there anything you need me to take today? And they would take it, and then they would resolve it. And that was great, right? So having something working just at the team or team of team levels is good, but organization-wide, even better. Coordinated cadences, that's something we'll talk a little bit more later. That's basically just aligning iteration starts. Refactoring. So if you thought technical debt and refactoring was important at the team level, for the exact same reason that we're talking about meshing gears and having small stories, refactoring your code is super, super important. You want that code to be in good shape so that as you're going fast, when problems arise, if you've got some problem that it before affected your team, now it can affect a whole bunch of teams. You can have cascading problems here. So have your code in good working order. Same exact argument for automating. So basically this is what I already talked about, but just have it visually. So we had the iterations of this one team. So we've got 2-week iterations, a team with 1-week iterations, and we got a Kanban team, and they're not aligned right now. Of course, the Kanban team is aligned with everybody, but there's no point at which they can do a retro of retros, right? So we just finished our retro. You didn't do yours. We have our retro now. Yours was last week. How did it go? I don't remember. I think we had a problem that involved you. So having this aligned, having the same start date is important, but also having compatible iteration sizes. Kanban is compatible with whatever. They can say, okay, at this point, sure, we can do a retrospective. When would you like it? Every week, every 2 weeks, whatever. Okay, every 2 weeks, that's great. 1 week and 2 weeks, obviously, they have a cadence that matches every 2 weeks. If you, for instance, though, had a team that was 3 weeks and you have a team that's 2 weeks, when do they interact? When do they line up? Well, every 6 weeks, 2 times 3, right? So that's not good. That's too long. So 3 weeks is not bad in and of itself. If we have Kanban 1 week and 3 weeks, then they align every 3 weeks. But you want to look at that and say, do the patterns we have here across the teams within this given value stream allow us to align our cadences? All right, and then, right, so one of these other things is that as you grow, not immediately, but as you grow, you may find that it's useful to have a value stream manager for the product and for the program. And they could be traditional sort of chief product owners or chief product managers or product managers or program portfolio manager or what have you. Having them think and work and move towards an agile way of looking is fantastic, but just plain having somebody that can coordinate the product efforts and the project efforts is important, or may be important. So don't just implement it, but when you see the need, implement it. It may be that at the 3-team level, you've got a product owner. The customer base is pretty straightforward. The market is pretty straightforward. So you have one product owner for all 3 teams. But when it gets to 5 teams, now it's going crazy. We need more product owners, and we need somebody to coordinate across those product owners. Okay? So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on portfolio and program management. I just think it's important to point out that this is definitely something that you can implement. The question is, when? It may not be the first thing. It may be the first thing. It may be that you're doing all of your work traditionally, but you start to break up your work into smaller projects. So for instance, I was working with Fidelity, and Fidelity they have a lot of divisions. So within one division, they were starting to go agile, and one of the first success stories that they were telling me about when I got involved with this program was that they were still doing traditional development, but they changed their portfolio and program management. So this one group, instead of doing a release every 9 months in a traditional way, all they did was they moved to doing 3 releases in the 9 months. So a release every 3 months, right? So they were doing a release, and while they were planning the next release, they were getting customer feedback. And then when they put out the first release, they'd get feedback that they would then put into the 3rd release, right? So it was rolling release. So they'd have a 4th and a 5th and whatever. But they moved from 9 months to 3 months quarterly. And they got a lot of value out of just moving to a more agile portfolio and program management basis. And then later, they moved to Scrum teams, right? So the idea here is you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it piece at a time and move from your traditional overall ecosystem step by step to a more agile ecosystem. Okay, so as an example here, breaking up the planned work, not into large, not saying, okay, we have like 2-year projects, but now we've got a quarter's worth of work, or in this case, an iteration worth of work. And in fact, we can, instead of doing the whole orange project, we're going to switch at some point to the blue project because that was more important. And having every iteration something releasable, we can get it out there, or we can get feedback. It can be just to, just to employees, or just to a piece of the market, whatever. And then we implement the full solution over time. Or maybe we just say, hey, we've got enough here. We can stop this and use that budget money for something else. Okay, so a very important thing is, how do we know that we're agile, right? So as we're growing, are we growing in an agile direction? It's sort of like the, that game you play as a kid, hot and cold, right? So you put on the blindfold and somebody says, you're moving towards, the objective, and somebody says you're getting colder. So you move in the other direction, you're getting hotter. You keep moving in that direction, you're getting colder. You switch, right? How do you know that you're agile? How do you get that feedback? Or maybe a better example is riding a bike. How do you know that you're not doing well riding a bike? You fell off and you skinned your knee. How do you know that you're doing well riding a bike? You got to your neighbor's house and now you're playing, wiffle ball or whatever, right? So that's pretty straightforward. How do you know where you're succeeding in agile? Yeah, I don't know. So in the past, the way I looked at this was, okay, this team has got stand-ups and they've got retrospectives and they have sprint reviews, and in the sprint review they demoed and all that kind of thing. You know what? The customer doesn't care. They don't care. What the customer cares about is, I have this request. Where the heck is it? Well, we had our sprint review. I don't care. Where's my feature? Now, that's what they care about. And it's been a really long time. And the Scrum team says, no, it's only been 2 iterations. And they say, oh, it's been 2 iterations for you. For me, this is something we requested a year ago. Oh, well, we have this internal process where, we have to balance project needs and all that. I don't care. Right? So from the customer's perspective, what Agile means is that you're delivering customer value more frequently than you were before. If you're not, then why bother? Now, for sure, there are going to be projects where you can't give it to the customer for a year or 2. Got that. But what you can do is you can involve the customer all the way through so that at the end they say, wow, this is exactly what we talked about, as opposed to, what is this? This is really not what I need now. Well, it's what you said you needed. Yeah, well, that was back then. This is now. Right? So that cycle time between when a customer asks for something and when you actually give it to them, that is a really important measure for understanding if you're succeeding with Agile. So if you see that time going down, great, you're more Agile. If not, sorry, you're not, right? You've got stand-ups and retrospectives, but sorry, you're not more Agile. And I think that really helps the company focus and the organization and the team and the coaches focus on what's the most important thing. Are we going in Agile direction? So actually, I'll be publishing more on this soon, but for now, I can give you a short intro to this idea. So, and this may be a little shocking for you, hopefully not too bad. I don't want you to feel bad. It's just a way to look at this. If the time from customer request to it's in production and they can use it is a year or more, then regardless of anything else, I'm sorry to say that's traditional. Now, another way to look at this is you can say, well, for my team, we don't have control over the release process. We don't have control over the upfront thing. And we're given a plan of all the stuff that we have to accomplish over the next 6 iterations. So, you know, what can we do? Our hands are tied. Okay, that's fine. So you could move this measure to from the time that our team gets the work to do to the time that we have something releasable. Right? So it may be 3 iterations before it's releasable. Okay, that's on you. Every iteration should be releasable. So you can look at how to improve that measure. The best is for the organization at large, but if you need to narrow it, that's fine. So you can say for our team, we're working traditionally, we're near agility, we're basic, intermediate, or advanced. As an organization, we're one of these, right? So you may be advanced at the team level and traditional for the organization at large, right? So where do these numbers come from? Well, basic is that you're doing Scrum and there's a request in the backlog. There's a request that comes into iteration planning on this day. 4 weeks later, using Scrum, you have a releasable iteration. You can't get, Scrum doesn't cover 5 weeks. It's 1 to 4 weeks, right? So if you're 5 weeks, then that's near. If you're 4 weeks, then that's pretty basic Scrum. More advanced Scrum teams, 2 weeks, and super advanced Agile teams can put something out within a day. Now Scrum, that doesn't really, that goes down to a week. Shorter than a week, that's something else. Whether it's Kanban or whatever you call it, doesn't need a label. Advanced is if you can turn something around within a day. And more teams can do that today. All right, so here's a way to look at, are we improving? Today we're traditional. A quarter later, we're near because we've gotten, we've changed our process. We're actually, getting something out in a quarter. A couple months later, you're at the basic level. Now you know if you're increasing your agility. And you know what? It doesn't matter if you're doing stand-ups or not. It really doesn't. It doesn't matter if you've got sprint planning or sprint reviews or playing ping pong as part of your process. It doesn't matter. If this time is coming down, you're becoming more agile. Whether you're using Scrum or Kanban or Scaled Agile or a process you invented, it doesn't matter. Because remember, the Agile manifesto does not have the word Scrum in it. It does not have the word stand-up in it. It does not have the word sprint review in it. It doesn't. It's principles and values. And Scrum, XP, and all that, those are methodologies that were created aligning with those principles and values. What you do is what makes sense within your circumstances. Now that said, it's not just going fast. If you're going fast but customers aren't involved and they say, well, you turned that around really fast, but it wasn't what I asked for, that's not really Agile.
Damon, sorry to interrupt again. Susan is asking on your previous slide on the cycle times. Can you touch a little bit on the cycle times in terms of if I'm an enterprise organization in the hardware or a manufacturing environment? It's the same principles apply?
Sure, good question. So that gets to what does Agile address, right? So it's the it's called Agile development as an Agile software development. It was originally intended for software projects, and but it has definitely spread beyond software projects. So manufacturing is a good example. The high-level thing that I would say is that if you find that you want to and you can implement the principles and values of Agile in general, then that's great. If you find you're in an environment where you can't, then this may not apply to you. I don't know a lot about hardware, so this is definitely not an area of expertise, but I can tell you what I have heard from folks is that these days hardware is actually mostly not hardware. It's mostly gosh, I don't even remember the name of it. It's got VS in it, 4 letters starting with a V. It's code. You're writing code, which is then turned into physical hardware. And there are simulators for that. So you can actually grow your hardware solution as well, right? So you can say, all right, we have these functions implemented, we've still got those, and you can test it, and you can see, you could work iteration to iteration and say that when we've decided to implement a new piece of our overall solution, we could get that done within 4 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever. So I unfortunately, I'm not a hardware expert, so I can't go too far into that. But the idea here is that as you're evolving your hardware and figuring out, okay, we need to add this, we need to add that. We were going to have math on board. We're not. Involving the customers all the way through means that at the end, when you actually produce that finished hardware, that what you produce is the most aligned with your market. But that's pretty much as far as I can take that. Okay. So in any case, cycle time is absolutely important, and I would say that is your overall measurement of whether or not you're succeeding. But you can definitely reduce that turnaround time by ignoring customers, ignoring quality, and ignoring morale. Right. So you have unhappy workers, working through the weekend, working extra hours, incurring technical debt, not involving customers, and you turn things around really quickly. But who wants that? So it is hard, but true agility requires that you're reducing your cycle time, that you're increasing the frequency of your customer involvement, that you're matching your definition of done, which is your measure of quality, and that the team is happy, right? Your best team is going to be a team that's happy, supported, trusted, safe, and they feel a sense of purpose such that when you ask them, they say, this is one of the best places I've ever worked. Now, the best way to make people happy is to give them a year of vacation every year, right? So that's fantastic. But who's going to do that? I'm not saying do that. But you want to make sure that the people are happy, they have a sense of purpose, right? And they feel safe and all those other things. Good morale. So all 4 together, that's how you know you're moving forward. Okay, so final bit here, and then we can move to Q&A. If we haven't already covered everything in the questions that have come up, and thank you for that, is when you're starting, start with a single team. Get good at that. So when we were talking in the rehearsal here for this, it came up, the idea of a cookie cutter, right? So if you're scaling to lots and lots of teams, you can think of the cookie cutter approach. What does my cookie cutter look like? If I'm trying to create a gingerbread man, does it actually look like a gingerbread man, or does it just look like I don't know, some weird abstract art, right? So if the thing that you're using, training, understanding, the overall ecosystem to create that cookie of a team, if the cookie cutter there is no good, then when you use that cookie cutter to create more teams, you're going to create more bad teams, right? So as an example, I was working with one organization, and I walked in, and every single stand-up room, the card wall was created with the blue painter tape, every single one, right? So that was part of their cookie cutter. And so I knew that there was a cookie cutter in there. But the other part of their cookie cutter was that their stories were actually a combination of, in this column it was requirements, and they were 3 months long, and this column that they were design documents, and they were 3 months long, right? It was not a good cookie cutter. So before you start cutting cookies with a cookie cutter, make sure you've got a good cookie cutter, right? So start with one team. You're doing a couple of iterations of work. That's great. You realize you need 2 teams. You feel like your cookie cutter is great. maybe you split the team or you create a new team, whatever, you're growing, right? And this gets to the question of, if I know I'm going to need 10 teams, why wouldn't I start with that? Because your cookie cutter may be bad. And one of the reasons that people start with large teams is like, we have all this work, it's going to take all this time. But part of that work and the time is rework and mistakes and misaligned understandings and bad coordination. And it's just a big coordination, you know what, right? But if you grow towards that, you're actually going to do that work faster. You may find out, you know what, we've gotten to 5 teams and we can get all this work done with this 5 teams within that same hoped for release time frame. We don't need those other 5 teams. That's fantastic. You can use those 5 teams for something else. So grow your solution. Right, so at this point, as we move to 2 teams, the only thing that we've added beyond pure Scrum is, if we're using Scrum, weekly co-planning, co-iteration review, and coordinated cadence. And this is an example. I'm not saying that those are the 3 things. It's some kind of magic. I'm saying circumstances for these particular teams and this particular organization was that they only had to add those things. So which would you rather do? Implement all of a large scaling system right away, or add these 3 things? I think the answer is clear. Add these 3 things. But that's just me, and that's my script. All right, so now we've grown to 3 teams. Now it turns out we need a value stream product manager, somebody that's looking out for, is the product aligned across all 3 teams? Are the product owners talking the same language? Do they understand the customer? They also added a daily stand-up of stand-ups and a retro of retros, and that's it. So for these 3 teams, what they grew over time was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 practices above and beyond, quote, pure Scrum. So again, which would you rather do? Those 6 things or all? Now what you might find is happening is that you're growing towards one of these scaling frameworks, and that's great. So if you think for our organization, less is the direction we want to go, or scaled agile is the way we want to go, then when you add the weekly co-planning, when you add the retro of retros, you might do them in the way that is talked about within that framework, so that you're growing into that framework and you're able to leverage that framework to have a common set of words and practices and resources and consultants and all of that. That's fantastic. In my experience working with dozens and dozens of companies over a long period of time, including organizations like Capital One that had 800 teams, not 800 people, 800 teams, and I'm sure they've grown since then. What has succeeded is the stuff that people understood because they grew into it, even when they implemented everything all at once. And I helped implement some of those large systems, but what I found was the stuff that sticks is the stuff that people understood because they grew into it. Everything else fell by the wayside. All right, so going along with that, some other guidance, not just in the structure, but your ecosystem. Now this is a little bit more prescriptive from my experience. What I'm saying is that when you have one team, to have that cookie cutter of creating a single team work well, you absolutely need an experienced Scrum Master. Not saying you have to start with one, but before you create a new team, it's good to know what an experienced Scrum Master looks like and to have at least one. Same for the product owner. Everyone on the team formally trained. I cannot tell you how many organizations I've gone into, and this team member learned Scrum from Yahoo, and this one learned it from Capital One, and this one learned it from Market Basket or wherever, and they thought that was Scrum, but they learned it from somebody who learned it from somebody who learned it, and it didn't look anything like Scrum. Right? So that's important to have a common, all on the same page. The managers connected to the team formally trained, right? So you want that magic middle, if you will, the people that feel like, hey, when the what hits the fan, we're the ones left holding the bag. We have to make this work. Make sure they're thinking in an agile way and not a traditional way. And that you have air cover for that team, that people are like, hey, this is a new team. They're going a little slow as they learn Scrum. That's great. These are some of the things that you need for success at the individual level. Now, as you start to create more teams, you're going to need somebody who's a senior Scrum Master or an Agile Coach. That could be external. That could be somebody that's grown with us internally. Maybe they'll come from another department that's already gone through this. You need not only an experienced product owner, but a product manager, right? Because with 3 teams, there is no way an individual product owner or even 3 product owners is going to be able to do all the work of interfacing with the customer. There's just no way. And you may have a good product owner who's not really a whiz with P&Ls, right? So you need somebody on the product management side. An agile product manager, but a product manager nonetheless. You want to make sure that you have a cross-functional agile adoption team. So the people managing your agile adoption as a project in your portfolio, it shouldn't just be the lead, the VP of engineering, if you will. It should be people from cross-functional areas of your company. So sales, marketing, HR, development, QA, product, UX, because problems are going to arise all across the board as you work towards moving from just a traditional ecosystem, the system surrounding the teams, to a hybrid of traditional and agile, and then eventually, possibly, if that's your goal, an all agile ecosystem. Right? So then finally, now not only do you have the individual cookie cutter, but you're able to create whole sheets of cookies. In order to do that, you need to have a training program for new Scrum Masters and product owners, a mentorship and coaching program for all of these folks, for managers, individual contributors, coaches, Scrum Masters, product owners. You still need that cross-functional leadership team. You're also going to start to run into the problem that the code you're writing is probably not of an agile bent. You need to have a technical coach or somebody that's really good at coding in an agile way. And believe me, that's a whole professional, whole profession in and of itself. You need to have that senior tech lead that understands how to write code in an agile way and can say things like red-green refactor and solid principles and stuff like that. If you don't have somebody that talks like that, you need to get such a person. You need to have a UX expert who is an agilist. If they say, you know what, 10 pixel perfect designs is the place to start, you do not have an agilist as UX expert. If they say, agile is where the problem comes from, no, you do not have an agilist as UX expert. DevOps, that's a whole topic all by itself, but you absolutely need to have a DevOps expert that can help you coordinate and combine operations into development. Lastly, rinse and repeat. As you're growing, think, is our cookie cutter in good shape? No, fix your cookie cutter. Is it in good shape? Yes. Add more people if you want. Otherwise, fix your cookie cutter. That's what it should say. Next time I'm going to have a cookie cutter in there. All right. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to SynerZip, and they're going to tell you a little bit about what they do.
Thanks, Damon. I have a few questions I will ask, the audience are asking, but I want to make sure, so thanks for the great presentation, Damon. Anybody who is listening, I encourage all of you to enter your questions as I go through the SynerZip slides. So there are 2 outstanding questions. One is Joe is asking, he has heard about this framework called Scrum at Scale, right? So it's not clear what is Scrum at Scale or any other frameworks, how they differentiate between your presentation, Scaling Agile Organically. Can you a little bit touch about that thought?
Sure, absolutely. So the main point of this is what I've been talking about is actually not a framework at all. It's a collection of patterns that I've seen over time that people have used as they grow. Right? So if you think of your agile adoption as a plant, you start out with the seed, and in the early days, you need to add more fertilizer or water or sunlight or whatever. And over time, what are the things that you need to consider? Some plants need more sunlight, some need less. So what are those patterns? For instance, retro of retros, stand-up of stand-ups, coordinated cadences, all that kind of stuff. Scrum at Scale includes those things by default. And so what I'm saying is, rather than think of, I need to implement Scrum at Scale, or Enterprise Scrum, I forget, there's so many that have the word Scrum in it. Think about implementing them a practice at a time as needed and moving towards implementing the whole thing if you need it.
That's good. Other thing, Damon, I wanted to ask, as a synergist, we end up talking to a lot of enterprise customers, and I think you touched a little bit earlier with your cookie cutter approach. But one of the issues we hear from VP engineering of enterprise customers, oh, we do monolithic thing, we don't do agile, and we just don't have time to do all this thing to carve out one team and then organically grow to 2 or 3 teams. So can you reiterate or a message to customers who don't do agile today, or they don't have a one team today where they can have a cookie-cutter approach where they can replicate that team? So if you can spend a minute or two, a little bit more.
Okay, sure. So I think what I hear you saying is, a couple of things. A, we don't have time to go agile. B, we don't have time to go a team at a time. We'd like to spread it across the whole organization all at once. Were you saying both of those things or just one of those things?
I think it's the second piece, because their organization, they were not agile and they went through the training, so they kind of understand, but they don't know how to get started with just one team, right? But their mindset, the conceptual is like, okay, I have one team which has 100 people, right?
I see. Okay. Well, I guess, there's never enough time in the world. no matter how large your organization it is, as it grows, people will say, we don't have enough people to do the projects we have in front of us. So you add more people, and then you add more projects, and you say, we don't have enough people to do the projects in front of us. There's never enough time. That's just the way the world is. But the question is, where would you like the pain? Would you like the pain in your lower back or in your shoulders? Where would you like the pain? That's the question. So you can take the pain in terms of, not being able to get things out fast enough for customers, or you can take the pain of, wow, moving to Agile has slowed us down a little bit. I remember working on one project where we were trying to go to a new database, and it was going over multiple years because it kept getting delayed by customer requests. At one point, we said, all right, we just have to knuckle down and tell customers, look, we're going to be slower. We're going to be slower. Sorry. Then we got the database conversion out of the way, and then we went back to being able to serve customers at a higher rate, and it was even faster than before because we had this new platform. So I think it's the same thing with adopting Agile. If you really want to get those benefits, you're going to have to invest and take some of that pain. The other thing that I would say is, you may not have time to just do one team. You may want to do them all, but the thing is, again, where do you want the pain? So if you do one team at a time, it's going to feel slow and all that kind of thing. But if you do a whole bunch of teams, you're going to have a whole bunch of problems that come from the different circumstances of the different teams all at once. Right? So I can't tell you how to get rid of the pain. I think you just have to choose which pain would you prefer.
Okay. One last question so far is, Jamin is asking a question. In one of the slides, he's intrigued, you mentioned 1 day period from user request to production. How is 1 day enough? Can you elaborate more on that?
The question is, what did I mean by 1 day, or was the question?
From user request to production, how is 1 day enough?
Well, if you have a request that, so think of a patch, right? So you have an existing product out there. You have the version of the software, and then the customer says, oh my God, I'm losing money. I'm going to sue you if you don't, this is a really extreme example. I'm going to sue you if you don't fix this. I need it right away. So do you say, oh, I'll get it to you next week? No, you can't say that. You have to say something like, okay, I'll do something that addresses that pain by tomorrow. And they might say, well, tomorrow's not good enough. It's 9 a.m. I need it by, lunchtime. So do you say no? No. You say, all right, well, let's try to reproduce the problem. All right. So we'll get a QA person on that's familiar with the product. Whatever else you were doing, stop and work on this. Okay. So they say, all right, I've reproduced it. Here's how to reproduce it. Somebody in development that is familiar with that says, oh, wow, that problem, that's definitely going to take us 2 days to fix. And so the support person says, 2 days? I can't call them back with 2 days. What can you do, in a few hours? Oh, well, in a few hours, we can't fix the performance, but we can remove the bug. So we could do that in a couple of hours. Great, let's do that. So we've broken down the problem into fixing the bug and fixing the performance issue, making it work and work quickly. So now you've turned that around in a short period of time. You can do that with anything. You can, right? You do it with patches. I know you do it with patches. You can do that with anything. Now, how to do that with anything, without running into, people say, they roll their eyes and they say, well, geez, Damon, you said you worked with large companies, but I'm skeptical now. Well, how to do that is complicated, right? So without creating Franken spaghetti code is definitely complicated. But that's why doing Agile is not easy, and why I call doing it within one day advanced. Being able to do that in a very calm way, without it being expedited or a lot of panic, that is hard. That's why that's advanced.
Sounds good. Thanks. So now let me, last few minutes, let me go over our synergy slide. Everybody, thanks for participating in our today's webinar. You have my contact information. I am Pankaj Jain. I am VP Software Services at Synergy. If you have any questions about today's webinar or in general about Synergy, feel free to reach out to me. So at Synergy, we basically work as your trusted co-development partner for your agile software product development. You get your own dedicated team of development and QA professionals. We help companies basically to accelerate your product roadmap delivery by enabling your to scale your present engineering team. So we become an addition of your engineering team. We don't treat ourselves as vendor, but we are like your co-partner, right? So we are your co-development team. We help companies to address the technology skills gap, whether technology is changing so fast, innovations are happening daily. So whether the skill gaps are in machine learning, blockchain, or big data analytics, QA automation, DevOps, or any area. So we have over 500 developers, experts in all different new technologies. So that's another way we scale. Damon, you need to stay on the first slide. This one out. So the third point is basically we do all this stuff in a capital efficient manner by minimizing your cost of software development. On an average, you will end up saving at least 50% of your development cost. And we allow the flexibility of our dual share model with on-site professionals if you do decide to do that. Next slide, please. So this slide gives you a snapshot of all of our clients and past clients. Over the past 14 years, Synergy has partnered with over 150 companies from many different domains and using different cutting-edge technologies. Our clients are all referenceable, and you can check the client testimonials on our website. Majority of our clients are small to medium-sized VC-backed companies. However, we do have large clients like Google and Dell, just to name a few. Next slide, please. You can connect with Synergy on our Twitter channels, LinkedIn, or Facebook, and the URLs are given here. We would love to hear your feedback and how can we help you. Next slide, please. This is our next webinar. Is a very interesting webinar from one of our customers. Colin is going to talk about real-time with AI, the convergence of big data and AI. That's scheduled for next month, October 18th. You please go to our website and register for that webinar. You will find it very interesting, as AI and big data analytics is the hot button nowadays. So you will hear it direct from one of our customers, which we are working with. I think, let me see if I have any other questions. No, there are no outstanding questions at this point. So Damon, once again, I really wanted to thank you for a great presentation today. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in our future webinars. Thanks and have a great day, everyone. And that's it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and thank you to everybody who participated.